and thanks for all of you for coming tonight. I assume that the fact that you're here means you want to do something special, not only in your career, but also in your life ongoing as well. And I think research is one of the best ways to make an impact in your career, and I'll show you what my journey has been, and hopefully you can have some takeaways for going forward. Now, the theme tonight is Headstart. And in my opinion, the best way to get a head start in your career and in your life is through collaboration. There's no nobility in trying to do everything yourself. I've worked really hard in the past, sacrificed a lot, and I've always found the biggest gains come from working with others and getting support that can all be mutually beneficial. So I've made it a point to try and set up collaboratives in each place that I've gone to in my career. Health and Information is the main one that I set up in Adelaide, and you can all be free to join. But as you go through your career and your research journey, be sure to make sure you form groups and work with others as you go forward. Now, the best example of that is my first research project. So I started becoming interested in research and also general surgery in my third year of medical school. That's about halfway through the University of Adelaide's undergraduate degree. And that's when I first approached Professor Gladman, who's a colorectal surgeon, because I was interested in gastrointestinal motility. He then said that he had this project to do a systematic review in the validity of augmented reality in surgical education. And as you can see there, the year is not 2017 when I started the project. The year of our publication is 4 years later in 2021. Now, it made a prestigious journal, but the point I want to emphasize is that myself and Ashray, who at the time was a medical student, now is a cardiothoracic registrar, at the time, we were putting in a lot of work trying to do a lot of the stuff ourselves. And that time frame would have been condensed significantly if I had worked as part of a collaborative and as part of a bigger group. So going forward, in 2018, I started thinking more about how I want to advance my career and also how I want to learn the necessary research skills to do a career of lifelong research. And I was really interested in the gut and also how the gut recovers after general surgery. And I thought that doing an honours year of an intensive period of research and learning would be the best way to form a foundation for future. So I set up a project that was supposed to be looking at gastrointestinal motility around general surgery at the Royal Adelaide using fancy gamma cameras. But then COVID came along and made that all not possible in 2020. So what I ended up doing was actually working with the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, and I actually joined their task force as part of a working group that we worked to assess the evidence of COVID-19 as it was coming out and form guidelines to advise surgical services across Australia and New Zealand. Now, this was an incredibly enriching experience where I, as a very junior medical student, got to work directly with experts around Australia and also career researchers who taught me a lot. And I also got to see how collaboratives, both inside a state and outside a state, got to work and learn from how they did it. As part of the working group, we produced a lot of guidelines which still oversee and govern surgical services adapting to COVID-19 today. And throughout the course of the year, I did a lot of work and got a lot of publications as a result. Then, because I did well in my honours year, I then used that to then forward on a PhD. And I actually started it based on the idea that I had for my honours project, which was looking at the recovery of the gut after general surgery. As I went on, and I put up the title of my PhD at the beginning to demonstrate that this is not fixed in stone. So as I went on, I found that a lot of opportunities came up along the way, and I actually expanded my PhD to look at a few areas in recovery of general surgery, some of which I'll touch on a bit later. But because I did well in my honours year, I had a good foundation, I had learned a lot of skills in research already. I was able to convince the university to allow me to do this concurrently to my final year of medical school. However, at this time, I sort of started to reflect and think about how other people who would come after me and wanted to do similar things that I was doing would be able to start in research without going through a lot of the challenges that I had to do. So during my honours year and doing my initial years of research, I sacrificed a lot, I worked really hard, and I got a bit of progress, but it came with a lot of effort. And now I started thinking about if we could have a collaborative model where everybody could work together, everybody could mutually benefit, then we could actually all gain things together, and the field of practice that we were looking into would actually grow as well. So this is my grandparents, and this is at the Key, a famous restaurant in Sydney. And I was telling them about the idea, and we actually came up with the logo, which I called it the Information in Surgery Journal Club. And this is the logo that my grandfather drew on a piece of paper at the restaurant. And this is the official logo that got formally endorsed by the University of Adelaide and other organisations in the future as well. And I actually put together this into a validated format that we were testing, and also I published in the ANZ Journal of Surgery. These are just some fundamental principles for forming any collaborative group. Now, I called it a journal club, and it focused on evidence-based surgery and building up innovation in a reliable way. But you can apply a lot of these principles to any group that you are forming at any scale. And so we started off with sessions intermittently, usually at 1 to 2 weekly intervals, where I'd invite speakers of any level to talk about any topic that they wanted, either within research or within their career. And yes, there was a teaching component from it, but the main aspect of this initiative was actually forming a community and forming a collaborative environment where people could meet new people and also benefit mutually. So this is the University of Adelaide. This is the room that we held most of the sessions. And I think this is the first official session where I gave an introduction on how to start in surgical research specifically. But the initiative grew rapidly, and as you can see in these photos, there are people ranging from junior medical students all the way up to world-renowned senior professors. And this was an all-inclusive, diverse environment where people got to meet new people and form a support network for anything that they wanted to do in research or outside as well. We started getting a lot of interest, and so as we went on, I expanded out the name to include all forms of health and also information, which we're looking into a lot in our research, particularly for artificial intelligence. So called it Health and Information, but it had the same model, just at a different scale. And as we start to grow and as we start to expand with more and more sessions, the audiences and the speakers that we start to get start to improve and increase as well. These are some of the flyers that I would post on social media and also put around the university for people who want to come. And as you can see, the range of speakers is very large. In the middle there, you may have heard of Greg Page, the original Yellow Wiggle. So through a lot of my research, I got to actually do some with him, looking at AEDs and their public access in Australia. And some of our work has made the media, the Sydney Morning Herald in Sydney. And then he actually talked at the Journal Club as well. Now, if you look up my YouTube, you can see his full talk there, and a lot of snippets from that ongoing as well. But it just shows what you can do through collaboration. And as you have picked up, probably already, through forming groups, the amount you can do is greater than the sum of the parts, as Aristotle would say. And I started to pick this up and actually started to try and measure this in a sort of meta-analysis sort of way. So this is in the first 3 months of forming the Information in Surgery Journal Club. And as you can see, we reached pretty much a half century of projects almost extremely rapidly. This was with no funding. This was just with grouping medical students together. And all of these papers, or pretty much all of these papers, have resulted in publications now. And so some of the University of Adelaide students have very impressive records. And so where I've gone in my career, I've tried to start new groups like this. My most recent one is where I'm working currently in Ballarat in regional Victoria, and it's called the Grampians Research Initiative. So this we're doing in a much more probably official way with executive endorsement from the get-go. But the purpose of this is to build rural surgical research primarily and actually have something that we can expand across Victoria and interstate as well. And as you can see, through the initiative, we've already started to see results in the first couple of months. So these 3 people involved in, my colleagues in Ballarat involved in the initiative, but the reason I put their photos there is these are 3 people who have already enrolled or are in the process of enrolling in higher degrees by research, so PhDs or Master of Philosophies. Prior to this, at Grampians Health or in Ballarat, we had 0. So in the first 2 months, we've already got 3 students who are most likely all going to result in PhDs on their record. And part of this, the science behind this is actually well known. And through forming groups, you can form results that actually outweigh or outsize the effort that you're putting in. Part of this is because of the Matthew principle, which is one of the most powerful effects in society, in my opinion. What that means is the more you do with something, the more opportunities will come your way, as long as you keep going. And so I want to emphasize that, yes, you will get a lot of opportunities, but you have to actually use them. And what you'll find if you actually do use them is that growth in any measurable metric is non-linear. And I don't want you to focus on the total number, but look at the growth rate of my publications and also my citations, and you'll look at this by looking at any researcher's academic record. You'll see that it'll start out fairly slow. There'll be a long period where you have to work for the publications, but then especially as you form bigger and bigger groups, you'll get starting to see gains at scale, and it'll actually increase in an almost exponential fashion. And along with a lot of increase in output, you'll start to get some pretty big wins as well. So the Adelaide score was one of the main portions of my PhD, which is an AI system that we developed to predict discharge and improve patient flow throughout hospitals, particularly derived in general surgery patients. And its initial algorithm actually made the front page of the South Australian paper, The Advertiser, and actually got some more media coverage as well. But it just shows to show you, if you keep going that same approach, you'll get not only increases in output, but you get really big wins here and there as well. And of course, as per the Matthew principle, that opened up a lot of opportunities as well. So our local health network, the Central Adelaide Local Health Network, covered this and put out some media coverage of their own. And then as a result, we started getting invites to provide expert opinions on AI. And it made sense because this was part of my doctoral research, and this is something we knew a lot about, and we were trying to drive, particularly in the implementation phase of this field, which hadn't been done a lot at all. And for me personally, this opened up opportunities I never would have gotten otherwise. And it opened up particularly advocacy opportunities to spread the word and communicate about my research on both a state and also a national level as well. So on the left, that's me talking last year as an invited speaker in Perth at the Pre-Vocational Forum for Australia and New Zealand. And on the right is at the RACS, or the College of Surgeons Congress, at the Tri-State meeting, which was in South Australia that year. And also, as part of that, because I've kept going with this same approach, we've now done a successful implementation study in a South Australian hospital of the Adelaide score, and it's already got some media attention as well. But the reason for the title of my talk is that we've shown that the benefit to a hospital each year, just in this initial trial, is about $10 million per year. So that's why my title of my talk was a $10 million impact, which I think will only grow in the future. So how do you get started? Well, I've actually summarized a lot of these principles in a publication I wrote during my honours year, just talk about my experience and some initial introductory research designs that you can get involved with no funding and minimal network. But I think, as I said, the main way is to form a network and also to reach out to somebody to guide you. Now, I used Elizabeth as an example through this, with permission, but I think she's a good example of somebody who's gone through that process and also has a track record to guide people as well. And in the modern day, we're actually blessed by the resource of the internet. In the past, you'd actually have to know people in person and then know somebody who knew a supervisor who was an expert in this field. In the current day, you can actually just look this stuff up on Google. So say you were interested in pediatrics, and particularly in chronic disease or in diagnostic tests, you can actually research on Google and try and find a supervisor on your own. Many of the institutions have websites that are official, so you'll see there's like an institutional page at the bottom there. There's Google Scholar, which is the most commonly used page for academics, and also there's other profiles like ResearchGate as well. And then with that, I would actually look up their record as well. So this is Elizabeth's Google Scholar. And the reason I've sorted by a year is that you need to be well versed with what they've been recently doing and what their current interests are as well. There on Google Scholar, it's presented all of their metrics. So you can look at their H-index, you can look at their growth, you can look at their key collaborators as well. So I think this is initially very, very important, particularly as you're making the first approach to try and get some guidance from them so that your interaction is actually primed from the get-go. Then I would go to their institutional page, so actually read about their career so far. And then a lot of the times the institutional pages actually list their academic email as well. So this is usually the best port of call to reach out to somebody, as you probably won't know their personal email. So this is a template that I use, and feel free to use as well. I've written this as sort of a draft email to Elizabeth. And this is written from the point of view of an intern at Gold Coast University Hospital who's already got some research under their belt as a medical student and is interested in doing a higher degree by research. So somebody who's interested in taking research up to the next level and making a real big impact throughout the course of their career. So I start by, in the title of the email, actually saying what my intention is and actually being quite specific around it. Then it's very important, particularly before you know them, to introduce them by their title, so Dr. Thomas. Then I start with my name, what my position is, where I am, and what my areas of interest are as well. That all should be upfront and should be made very clear. Then you should also talk a bit about your experience so far so that the supervisor knows where to pitch the initial interactions. And then I would always attach my CV on this initial email also. Then I would say very clearly what my goals are from the interaction and what my goals are in the short and mid and long term as well. And so I say there that a goal is actually a high degree by research. Then I would actually not only stop there, but actually put some work in before you actually meet with the supervisor. So the best way to do that is to actually think about it, come up with your own ideas, and look into them. You don't have to stick with them, and the supervisor may advise something better, but the interactions are always stronger and better, and you're going to get more out of it from an interaction and also an output perspective if you've actually done some sort of effort and some sort of groundwork before. So here I evidence that by saying that I'm interested in a Master of Philosophy specifically, so that means or implies that I've looked up what that degree is and entails. And then I've looked up and actually read into diagnostic tests for pediatric chronic disease, which, because I've looked up Elizabeth's profiles online, I actually know is an area of expertise. And then I say what my intention is from the meeting. Then I say that I've actually put together a draft proposal for them to review to prove that I've done my groundwork. And then I say what my intention in the long term is, which is for her as a principal supervisor. Then, of course, just common courtesy things. I say that I can meet at any time and place of your convenience, and then I give my, my position, my name, and then my contact details as well at the bottom of the email. And then for the initial meeting, there's some very simple but very crucial concepts that should be raised. So the first is, as I mentioned, study their prominent work, but also their recent work as well, so that all of your conversation in the meeting is actually primed and actually backed by something. It's a lot more useful and a lot more productive that way. Then prepare the points, and I actually like to prepare physical handouts or hard copies to actually go through in the meeting as well. It makes it more engaging, but you don't have to do that. Then come with clear goals, but be open to different parts. So I found this, particularly when I was starting out, that a lot of my interactions with supervisor, I'd come with an idea, but then they'd suggest something completely different. Now that's okay, particularly because you can do a lot of those ideas later on in your career, and I have done that. And you'll see evidence of that based on my honours year compared to my PhD as well. And then learning, grit or perseverance and benefits over the long term will be far more productive and rewarding for you over any short-term wins. And then present yourself seriously in terms of how you talk to them, how you dress, everything about the interaction, and be early especially, particularly if it's somewhere where you haven't been before. And say you have the initial meeting with Elizabeth and she says, that's all good and well, let's put in the application for the Master of Philosophy. However, I've got this really cool idea about looking into the benefits or the effects of research events, such as this one, for Gold Coast medical students. This will be a really useful paper. Let's go about designing this. So how do I do that? Now, I've done a talk already, which you can watch on YouTube, about forming or framing research questions, which I'll let you watch in your own time. But how would you actually go about designing this study? So first, I actually like to identify an area that can be improved. Now, I think that you don't have to go for a gap in the literature like a lot of people say. You just have to improve something with your research. So that should be your aim. Then understand the current evidence. Now, I think that the best way to do that is through Google Scholar. The reason is because it sorts based on their citations and also includes a lot of Google's algorithms for search relevance. So you'll immediately get a lot of the prominent literature and a lot of the most relevant literature in whatever field you're going for in the most efficient way possible. Then, depending on the state of the literature from your initial scoping searches of Google Scholar, select a study design. So you may be in a completely new field and you may want to do a review of the literature that's there. You may want to look at evidence that's already been collected or data that's already been done in retrospective fashion. You may want to collect information in a prospective or going forward in time way to characterize it. You may already be at the case where you're trialing something. So that's a cohort study where you're looking at effects and you're comparing to something as well potentially. And then the highest level of a study design is a randomized control trial, and even higher than that is actually a systematic review of randomized control trials as well. Then the most important part of designing a study is what are you measuring? And you need to be very clear with that. I think be as objective as possible when you're doing this. That means use numbers in what you're measuring, so that means you can show a statistical difference clearly. However, when that's not possible, which may be the case in this idea I mentioned, use validated measures. So all that means is that there'll be a survey that's been done in the past that's been scientifically shown to be actually associated with what you're measuring through a validated process. Identify resource that you need, and as I mentioned before, seek collaboration early, and then obtain ethics approval if required to do so. And then say you go and you do a successful study, you interview and you survey Gold Coast students, and you show that, yeah, research and research events is beneficial. So how do you write this into a paper? So overall, I think be short and sweet in your writing. There's no benefit in being lengthy and going into thousands and thousands of words. Read examples of the same article type that you're trying to do, particularly in high impact medical journals or whatever you're aiming for, to be familiar with it. And then in your first introduction, this is the overall structure that I use. So first I start with a couple of sentences about the topic as a broad whole and overall the prevalence or how common it is. Then I briefly, in 1 to 2 sentences, talk about evolution and advances in the field. Then I suggest the current area of improvement and I frame it. And then I suggest the aim of the study and list it clearly. Then in the methods section, this is my order that I follow. I list off the study design, the guidelines that we're following. You can find this on the Equator Network or website that lists out all the guidelines that you can follow. What the population is, the interventions and comparators, outcome measures, analysis that you were doing, ethics and institutional approvals as well. Then in the results, this is the easiest section to write up. You write about the population characteristics or like the demographics, and then list all the results per the outcome or measure that you were talking about. Then in the discussion, this is the structure I use. You summarize the broad implications, you compare to past evidence, you talk about the clinical implications and then the limitations, and then finally you end with conclusions of the topic, a very brief summary, and then the future directions going forward as well. And overall, when writing papers and when publishing, let your work do the talking. And I think the best way is form your own research profiles once you've actually got something on your record, and then people can look you up and actually network with you as well.